Large flakes of snow began to fall on the asphalt. Before I could even walk another block, the accumulation quickly overwhelmed the precautions set out by the street plows. Within half an hour, the well-manicured lawns shouldering the sidewalk were blanketed in white powder. The snow found its way into my boots through holes where the leather and the sole met, soaking my heels. I traveled around town until I couldn't feel my feet any longer. It was a painful numbing sensation that caused me to grit my teeth. I tried to find shelter, but it was of no use. Seems like the neighborhood I'd wandered into was too ritzy, too upper-middle-class suburbia to have any forgotten dumpsters or abandoned storage containers for me to weather the night in. But just before I'd lost all hope, I spotted a park bench beneath the glow of a streetlight. I knew there wouldn't be any warmth there, but at least I'd be off the ground. They should really do one of those survival TV shows, but for the homeless trying to survive in winter. It would be more entertaining than some British guy drinking his own piss somewhere in the jungle, loaded down with a ton of gear and new age technology. As I laid down and receded into my Carhartt like a turtle in its shell, I reflected on how I'd gotten here, 27 years old and homeless. Of course, I knew exactly why I was here. Sobriety had helped me shed that victim mentality. I was certainly to blame, but it did nothing for the poverty that addiction had sunken me into. After multiple arrests, a year incarcerated up at state, and several relapses, I was essentially a leper to any potential employers. Finding a job was next to impossible. I'd cleaned up my act, but it was too little, too late. I was on my way up to Worcester, coming from Cincinnati. It wasn't too far by car, but a long trudge on foot. I still had some family up there, an uncle who was a farmer and a pastor. My hope was that he was the good kind of Christian, the kind who'd receive me like a prodigal son and put me to work on his farm, and not the bad kind of Christians that quickly spat judgments and really only worshipped their BMWs and flat-screen TVs. But as the snow coated my knees and a deep chill took hold of my bones, I wondered if I'd ever make it there to find out. My eyes were heavy, my mind screamed for sleep, but every time I started to doze off, a cold gust of wind would roll across my body, piercing my clothing, keeping me from slumber. I shifted to my side to block my face from the biting wind with the backrest of the park bench, but as I did, a flicker of light caught my eye. A neon glow oozed around the trunks of birch trees that lined the park, splashing bright yellow across the surface of the snow. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, making sure they weren't playing tricks on a tired mind. But sure enough, it was real. Though, when I first came through the park, there definitely hadn't been a light beyond the small patch of forest behind the bench. I was sure of it. Still, it sparked my curiosity. And there was no way I was getting any sleep tonight. Not out here in the cold anyway. Who knows? Maybe it was somewhere warm with an owner that wouldn't mind if I hung out in the lobby for a bit. My knees creaked like a tin can as I rolled off the bench and made my way through the trees, pushing through underbrush and avoiding low-hanging branches. When I finally came to the clearing on the other side, I was completely awestruck. I'll be damned. It was a Blockbuster video. I hadn't seen one of these since I was a kid, but here one stood with the lights on and everything. The blue ticket logo was the size of a Buick, buzzing its neon hum and hanging over the entrance doors. Nostalgia immediately flooded my senses. VHS and DVDs of my favorite movies in my hands, the taste of candy and soda on my tongue. Back when things were simpler, back when things were good. My feet propelled me forward before I had even decided to go in, as if my body knew heaven lay ahead and my brain just hadn't comprehended it yet. Okay, heaven was a little of an overstatement, but it might as well have been in the eyes of a freezing homeless man. After shambling through the snow in the parking lot, I pressed my forehead against the storefront glass. The window had soaked up the heat that radiated from within and felt warm against my skin. I could see row after row of DVDs displayed neatly on wire basket shelving. The walls were painted that canary yellow color, and had blue accents around the trim. It looked like a time capsule, something from the early 2000s that had been frozen and well preserved. But where did this suddenly appear from? And where the hell was everybody? The lot was empty, and I didn't see a soul stirring from within, but there was a "We're open" sign hanging next to the door. I looked at the clock on the far wall, 9:46 p.m. Maybe the cashier was in the back somewhere, getting ready to close up for the night. That seemed likely, but maybe they wouldn't mind if I went in and warmed up for 15 minutes or so. As I opened the door, a bell dinged overhead. I slipped into the lobby and let out a sigh of relief as a wave of heat washed over me. "Hello?" I called out. A few seconds went by and no answer. I took a few more steps and called out again, but was only met with silence. Maybe they were in the can. I sauntered through the aisles and perused the collection of DVDs, thumbing through several titles I recognized and many more that I didn't. After about 10 minutes, I was good and warm and feeling like a kid again. The smell of clean carpet, plastic cases, and an undertone of buttered popcorn brought back a sea of memories. I was just starting to drool over a delicious-looking box of chocolate-covered cookie dough bites when I heard a small commotion coming from the office room in the corner. "Hello? I just stopped in to get warm and look at some movies. It's turning into a blizzard outside. Is anyone there?" I tried to keep the gruff out of my voice and sound as gentle as I could as I made my way towards the noise. I knew I looked pretty rough, and I didn't want the cashier to be frightened by my presence and call the cops. The door was wide open. I knocked on the door frame before peeking my head around the wall. I opened my mouth to greet whomever was inside, but saw instead that the room was empty. There was an empty desk with a pushed-in rolling chair, a single motivational poster that read, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take," and then a peculiar red door that was cracked open on the other side of the room. The vibrant red was an odd choice because it clashed poorly against the bright yellow of the room. It also had a large silver knob that was very ornamental in the Victorian Gothic type of style. A rusty skeleton key hung loosely in the keyhole, looking very out of place against the elegance of the lock. I pulled it from the door and immediately noticed the weight of it in my palm. It seemed heavier than it should have been and left stains of brown and orange on my skin. A strange vibration seemed to pulse from it, growing in intensity the longer I held it. It built and built until it started to rattle the fillings in my molars. Somewhere deep down I knew I should drop it, but I felt as if I were stuck in a trance and couldn't. I only stared and gripped it harder until my knuckles were white. Just as my entire body started to tremble, the sound of something slamming on the other side of the red door broke my mind from the key's hold. I cursed under my breath, looked to the door, and then back down to the key. The vibration had stopped. Did that really happen? Or was it all in my mind? I wasn't sure. Part of me said I should drop it and get the hell out of here. But the other part knew I might very well freeze to death outside, and was also insatiably curious as to what was on the other side of the door. After a brief hesitation, that side won out. I slipped the key in my coat pocket and opened the door. Stretched before me was a long corridor. The floor was a beige carpet. The walls were painted the same red as the door, and the ceiling was white and peppered with flickering LED light panels. At the other end was another fire engine red door. I was halfway down the hallway when it occurred to me that I hadn't seen this addition on the side of the building from the outside. Surely I would have noticed a brick tunnel as long as a football field jutting out to the side of the Blockbuster. But it was dark, and maybe I could have just overlooked it. The same Victorian lock was on this door, just like the last one. After jiggling the handle, I found that it was locked. I slid the key out from my pocket, praying that it wouldn't start its ominous humming again, and pushed it into the lock. A loud click echoed off the walls as I turned it and opened the door. A barrage of lights and sounds smacked me in the face as I stepped into the lobby of an arcade. Gaming cabinets of every genre and flavor twinkled and buzzed with sound effects and colorful graphics. What on earth? Maybe the Blockbuster was connected to an old arcade? I could see that being a favorable combo back in the 90s and early 2000s. I strolled past several renditions of Donkey Kong's and Mr. Pac-Man's. I ran my fingers over the colorful buttons as I went. I even thought about playing one, if only I had a quarter or two. The giggling of a child erupted behind me. I spun around after nearly jumping out of my skin, but there was nothing but a claw machine behind me, stuffed with pink bunny rabbits.
Over here!
Shit, I hissed. It felt like a gust of wind blew across the back of my neck, causing the hairs to stand up on my arm. Suddenly, a bright white light filled the room. At the same time, a door swung open and closed into the kitchen. Something in my gut said not to go back there and investigate. But maybe I had been homeless for too long, and my survival instincts had died in the gutter along with everything else. So I followed anyway.
Hello?
I whispered sheepishly as I pushed my way into the kitchen. Pots and pans dangled over a cook line, and a stack of pizza boxes sat neatly on the counter. The boxes were generic, no discernible logos to determine the name of the arcade. I threw my body against the wall, startled half to death at the sound of another door slamming. Jesus Christ, what am I doing here? A small skillet the size of a pancake swayed back and forth next to my shoulder. I grabbed it as I made my way to the rear of the kitchen, just in case I needed to use it as a weapon. It was another red door. It opened just the same as the others with the skeleton key, but instead of another place of fun and delight, it was a vast room the size of a small warehouse. Every inch was porcelain white. Even the grout between the eggshell floor tile was white. The walls seemed to soak up the fluorescent lights that shone overhead, giving the entire room a sterile operating room vibe that caused me to squint my eyes against the brilliance of it. What the hell was this? Maybe a future site for a new data center? I wasn't sure, but judging by the height of the ceiling, I definitely should have seen the structure towering over the Blockbuster when I first arrived. The space seemed completely empty, but there was, however, a 10-foot ladder that led up to a small divot in the room that contained another door over on the far side. The red slab stood out like a drop of blood against a wedding dress. I made my way over to it, my heels smacking loudly off the ceramic tile and tarnishing the sterile environment with a trail of dirt. After climbing the ladder, I came to stand on a small ledge, no larger than 2 feet wide. I had to balance carefully as I unlocked the door and slipped through the frame. That little voice inside of me was sounding the alarms now, playing the sirens to turn back, to run far, far away. And I knew I should have, but I just had to see. I had to find out what this place was. But before the door had closed behind me, I felt a sharp pain at the base of my skull where something hit me hard. I dropped the skillet and went to my knees. My vision swam as what sounded like carnival music pulsed through my ears.
That's right, folks. Step on down and see the mighty Maxwell.
The voice sounded like it was in a fishbowl and somewhere far away.
You won't believe your eyes. This magician will blow your mind. Step right up and see the show.
I tried to crawl back towards the door that led to the white room, but something heavy smacked against the back of my head for a second time, and suddenly, everything went black. Where the hell am I? A bright light swung on a chain overhead. Pain screamed behind my retina and flowed past my right earlobe.
And for my first trick, I will saw this volunteer from our audience in half.
A child's voice rang out, somewhere out of sight. I didn't even have time to react before something metal bit through the flesh of my abdomen. It was a hot, searing pain as the teeth of the saw blade chewed through my intestines. I screamed as it cut through my stomach like butter and came to eat at my spine. I could feel the grinding all the way up into my neck as the saw cut through my lower discs. Suddenly there was a snap and a release where my lower half separated from my body. Blood pooled in my throat. I spat and gargled as it threatened to drown me.
Now we will put them together again.
I wept and pleaded as I felt my hips being smashed back into my rib cage and twisted violently. The pain was so unbearable that I wished I could die. I even begged for death until suddenly it grew intensely hot and then nothing. The pain disappeared immediately and the blood was gone from my mouth like it hadn't even happened.
Ta-da!
A roar of laughter and clapping echoed from all around me. I craned my neck to see that I was in some sort of a circus tent, and there were dozens of children cheering from stadium seating on the outskirts of a large stage. But they were gray with black eyes that looked like obsidian glass that were too large for their faces. They looked like horrifying children from an old black and white movie.
Get me the fuck out of here!
I bellowed as the gray child with the top hat swung the box on heels that I was lying in.
Hey, that's a bad word. Watch your mouth, mister.
The boy in the top hat scowled.
Fuck you!
I spat, pushing with all my might against the box. Luckily, it seemed to be made of cheap plywood, and I snapped through it easily. The children all screamed in unison and surrounded me as I came to stand on the stage. I slipped off one of my boots and held it high over my head, ready to strike if any of them came at me.
Bad man, bad man, bad man!
They screeched. One lunged at me. I brought the heel of the boot down harshly on his forehead. He cried out and slid back into the crowd.
Bad, bad, bad man!
They chanted even louder. I cursed as I swung over and over again, bludgeoning them with my Timberlands before they could get to me. Suddenly, the carnival music went quiet, and so did the children. A large shadow crept over the circus tent, and the temperature dropped so much that I could now see my breath. The boys all began to whimper and cry before suddenly scattering out of sight somewhere beyond the skirts of the tent.
I see you've met my children,
a voice thundered overhead. I crouched low and clenched my boot tightly in my hand, suddenly feeling like it wouldn't be enough to dissuade whoever the voice belonged to.
Why are you here?
The voice asked.
What do you mean, why am I here? There was a fucking Blockbuster in the park, and I was freezing to death. I just went inside, man.
I replied, shaking like a child myself.
But you're much too old.
The voice sounded displeased.
Too old for what?
An icy touch caressed my cheek and the back of my head. I recoiled and swung my boot in the air wildly, but hit nothing.
Ah, I see. You are like a child, but not a child. What the fuck does that mean?
I tried to sound brave, but couldn't keep the fear out of my voice.
I am the Shadow Man. This is a place for lost boys. I guide them to my web where I may feed from them. You were lured into my trap because the drugs kept you from your manhood. You are still weak and pathetic like a child, still an orphan. And I am the eater of orphans.
A shiver crept down my spine. The eater of orphans. I didn't know what to do or what my next move was. What could I do against a shadow deity that I couldn't even see? Beg. I could beg, just like I always had.
Just let me go. Like you said, I'm too old.
I croaked, desperately trying not to piss myself.
I could, but my children would have so much fun playing with you. Yes, I really think they would. I'll give you a head start. You have, let's say, 30 seconds.
A dark and heavy chuckle filled the room, causing tears to fall down my face. My mind raced. I suddenly felt like a caged rabbit, and adrenaline took over. I quickly threw on my shoes and bolted for the red door at the edge of the circus tent. I could hear their laughter behind me. There was a pitter-patter of small feet on the stage, but I didn't dare look back. I flung open the door to the white room, but it wasn't white anymore. It was blood red and filling with water. A small waterfall crashed through the ceiling tiles overhead, and the room was nearly flooded all the way up to the 10-foot-high ledge I stood on. Light panels cracked and twisted until falling into the water below. The laughter grew louder. How many seconds did I have left? Couldn't be long now. I dove headfirst into the water and began to breaststroke downward towards the door to the kitchen of the arcade. I was halfway there when I heard the splashing of dozens of small bodies hitting the water. The door was almost impossible to see now since the room was the same color, but thank God for that silver doorknob. My swimming was slowed by my heavy winter clothing, but I kicked as hard as I could until I reached the knob. I twisted and pulled at it, but it wouldn't budge from the pressure of the water. I planted a boot on each side of the frame and pulled the knob as hard as I could, bubbles pouring out from my mouth as I screamed. It should have been impossible to budge, but somehow the door swung open. A flood of water carried me through the kitchen and out over the waitstaff pickup window, splashing me against arcade cabinets. The grade children hooped and hollered like savages right on my heels as I gathered myself and bolted for the door to the hallway. I sprinted through the corridor as the water rushed around my ankles like a river. The door to the office of the Blockbuster was still cracked open. I burst through the slab, nearly breaking it off its hinges, and barreled through the lobby. The water gushed forward, carrying away the bottom shelves of DVDs across the carpet. There were small hands pulling at my coat and pinching at my skin, trying to get a good enough hold to bring me down, but I was too fast. I didn't slow down until I was out the front door and through the parking lot. I bent over, gasping for breath, and looked back to see nothing. Oh my God. The Blockbuster was gone. There was only an open parking lot, covered in snow, but there was no sign of the building, or any structure of any sort. The laughter tickled at my ear, echoing through my mind.
Still an orphan, and I am the eater of orphans.
It's been 2 years since that night. I had made it to my uncle's farm, and he had given me a place to sleep, food to eat, and a job to work, and I was damn grateful for it. I worked hard and saved up enough money to buy my own truck and rent a small brick ranch in town. I even had a girlfriend. Her name's Natalie, a waitress over at Mel's Diner. She brought me lunch every day out at the ranch. I'm thinking about asking her to move in with me soon. Yeah, everything has turned out great, but the nightmares never let me forget about that Blockbuster out in Mount Orab. I never mentioned it to my uncle or my girlfriend. They wouldn't understand. But I had posted it anonymously about my experiences recently to a subreddit. Seems like I wasn't the only one who had experienced the Shadow Man or the Grey Children and lived to tell the tale. And a couple of us were talking about meeting up soon and doing something about it. Maybe going after the Shadow Man and stopping him for good. I still had his key after all. And by the way it vibrates morning, noon, and night, it's like it's trying to get back to him. Maybe another trap will show up for me if I carry it back to that place. There are some theories on how to deal with him, how we might kill him. Maybe this time, I'll be ready for him. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.